Something echoed in your mind the moment they appeared, not because they came to save you, but because they came to show you. They didn't come to stay, but they stamped every unguarded corner of your inner world as though they had full access. And in truth, they did. Why does life fling you, unannounced, into the orbit of someone you can't ever be with? Why that flash of profound recognition, so vivid it stops the clock, then dissolves into absence? That is the universe, or life, or whatever depth beyond your senses you want to name, at its most surgical. It cuts to expose what you've been avoiding, what you've never learned to name inside yourself. When that person arrived, someone out of reach for every conceivable reason, you didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with a need, with a void, with a part of yourself desperate to be seen. This encounter wasn't an accident, it was a seismic push. Their face, their laugh, their voice, they were never the point. They were the activation switch. They showed up not because they wanted to stay, but because something inside you was aching to be awakened. There's a cruel symmetry to impossible connections, not because they wound you, but because they open the wound you didn't even know you had. They bring to light the part of you that remains unclaimed, unloved, hidden. They make you electric, alive, oscillating between euphoria and despair, until finally they leave you breathing into the space they vacated. That's when the real journey begins, not to recovery, but to revelation. You see, this wasn't about love. This was contradiction, this was tension, this was a tender but brutal reminder that what you long for, be it calm, validation, freedom, depth, you never built inside. They came to show you where you stood on your own map, and where you'd left blanks. They became your mirror, reflecting not what's beautiful, but what's undeveloped, unintegrated, unseen. And in that reflection, you caught a glimpse of a truth you weren't ready for. Look at your reaction, the restlessness, the ache, the impulse to chase. Ask yourself, is this longing for them, or is it a longing for the part of yourself they woke? Are you yearning for a person, or for peace? For escape, or for wholeness? Because when you remove the person, what remains is the echo. And that echo doesn't just hum with memory, it hums with absence, it hums with potential, and then comes the confrontation. Who are you without them? There's no voice, no promise, no story, just vast interior landscape, and a self you may not know how to hold. That is both the danger and the gift. The danger is you might collapse. The gift is that everything you thought you needed outside was always meant to die away, so something unshakable could take root inside you. It's not punishment, it's precision, and what lingers after isn't regret, for regret keeps you turned outward. What lingers is return, to self, to silence, to shadow, to clarity, not because you lost someone, but because you found yourself. That impossible person was never a soulmate in the fairy tale, since they were the awakening. And their exit, that was the punctuation. This conditioning, this structure, this addiction to a familiar emptiness. You didn't ask for it consciously. You accepted it unconsciously. But accepting something doesn't mean it's unchangeable. That storm, that electric surge when they appeared, that was your nervous system lighting up a dead circuit in your psyche. A circuit you hadn't touched because you were afraid of the dark you'd hold when the surge ended. Here's the real work: to stop idealizing what activates you, to stop confusing chaos with depth, to stop interpreting intensity as destiny, and to stop mistaking the pain of your unfinished inside as the crisis of your love story. Because intensity will always invite you. It's seductive, it's luminous, it feels like truth. But intensity doesn't build character, it reveals absence. Depth you earn, wholeness you build. You don't receive it from another person, you grow it inside. Imagine waking up one day and seeing them, your impossible person, and feeling only a soft gratitude, not the trembling, not the obsession, but the quiet knowing, you came to shake me, so I'd wake. That moment is the distance between conditioning and conscious living. That moment is the threshold of self-possession. That moment is the relief of not needing to name them because you're not needing them. What truly heals is less about them ever coming back and more about you coming home. Home to yourself, home to your own clarity, home to the love you denied, not the slogans, not the Instagram affirmations, but the slow pulses of real intimacy with your own heart, not for show, not for someone else's gaze, but for one lone being who matters more than any idea, you. This is the arc of impossible encounters. They start with spark and end in silence, but in that silence, you lean forward and hear something far deeper than any love song, the tremor of your own presence, the truth you couldn't hold until holding nothing but yourself. That is the rebirth, and so if you're driving now or walking into a room later and their name comes uninvited, you aren't betraying who you've become by thinking of them. You're simply standing in the distance that separates the echo from the source. You've been given a glimpse. You've felt the wound. Now you get to write your way through it if you choose to. You get to decide whether to stay triggered or to track the map they gave you. Letting go isn't forgetting. Letting go is letting come forward what is ready to live. You don't close a door on them. You open a door in you. You don't destroy a memory. You forgive its role in your awakening. You don't reduce the moment. You expand your capacity for all moments. The hard question then becomes simple. Will you let this encounter define you, or will you let it refine you, beyond the ache, beyond the admiration, beyond the intensity, beyond even the ecstasy, is the invitation to remember who you are underneath everything. Who you were before the world told you who you ought to be, who you were before you needed them to feel seen, who you were with your wounds exposed, your needs raw, your heart unguarded and yet whole. There's no returning to innocence. There's only returning to conscience, conscience of your own depth, conscience of your own simplicity, conscience of your own right to inhabit yourself, without rescue, without compliment, without consumption. So, this is your choice. Do you keep searching for someone to complete you, or do you complete yourself and finally meet someone who meets you from completion? That option never arrives until you stop living from longing. Impossible encounters do two things. They cut you open, and they remind you to stitch yourself back together, stronger. They're not curses, they're crucibles. Nothing about them is accidental. Everything about them is invitation. The question isn't why they came. The question is what you will do now. And now that you've touched the edge of your own unclaimed interior, something shifts. A space opens where judgment once lived. Not because the pain is gone, but because suffering has ceased to chase you. You begin to sense that the wounds which once seemed to define your narrative were actually signposts pointing toward deeper terrain, an inner territory you have yet to inhabit. No longer outsiders introducing you to yourself, these impossible encounters now recede, leaving you with a clearer vision of your own interior architecture. And what you see is simultaneously shocking and liberating, all the places you hadn't visited because you were waiting for someone to light the way. You realize that every intense connection, every burning blaze of recognition was a doorway, not because those people held the key, but because they invited you through the threshold. And invitation without response is not rejection, it's freedom. You weren't missing something out there, you were missing the permission to feel yourself fully and without apology. You weren't imprisoned by circumstance or by their absence, you were held captive by your unwillingness to face the terrain of your own feeling. When they were there, the vibration vibrated, but when they left, you were left with the resonance, your own frequency. Could you learn to hold it? Now begins the work that isn't glamorous, to sit inside your own echoes. To observe the tremor in your chest without seeking to anesthetize it. To sit with the hollow spot in your gut without layering hope or narrative on top. To simply feel what feels true. This isn't romantic, it's elemental. It's gravity, because the soul doesn't need antidotes, it needs attention, and when you begin giving it that, when you stop believing your only value comes from who values you, you begin to breathe in rhythm with your own worth. That is not comfort, it is reclamation, and reclamation is not a destination. It's a posture, a daily orientation towards self, care, self-honesty, self-approval. It means the next time you feel that surge, whether triggered by a person or a song or a memory, You don't run. You don't chase. You witness. Ah, here it comes again. And instead of rushing for rescue, the mind's way of avoiding discomfort, you lean closer. You become increasingly skilled at discerning between the tremor that says something still needs my attention, and the tremor that says I want to relive pain because it's familiar. The first whisper is a messenger, the second is a pattern. It's not always easy to tell them apart. That's why it matters to build capacity, to develop tolerance for nuance, ambiguity, contradiction. Because this work, like life itself, is less about clarity and more about courage. You might lose count of how many times you slip back into old habits, idealization, obsession, fantasy, desperation. That's natural. What matters isn't that you tremble, but how soon you remember you're not alone with the tremor. You remember your own presence as anchor. You allow yourself to be seen by yourself. When your mind races, your chest tightens, your breath shortens. You offer yourself a vow: I will not abandon you again. That vow isn't spoken to anyone else. There's no audience, and that is what makes it real. Gradually, the mirror shifts. It no longer reflects someone else's absence. It reflects your own face, strong and open, willing to hold tenderness and tenacity in the same breath. You begin to understand that every encounter with the impossible was a chapter in a story that had already begun, long before your first infatuation, long before you met that person, long before you labeled it love or destiny. That story is the story of your becoming, your own genealogy of need, growth, surrender, ascent. This transformation doesn't happen in grand moments of catharsis. It happens in quiet recalibrations, when you choose solitude over distraction, presence over pattern, discomfort over convenience. When you listen to your own voice before answering another's, when you stop measuring your value by how much you're wanted and start measuring it by how much you want yourself, that desire is fierce. It's the only desire that isn't built on absence. It's the desire of belonging to yourself. You start to notice the difference in your relationships. They no longer begin with magnetism and end in obsession. They begin with curiosity and evolve into mutual expansion. You no longer fall into crushes. You fall into conversations. You no longer chase after reconnection. You stay connected to your own center. And this center is so solid. Its gravity stops the implosions of attachment. It doesn't stop you from feeling love. It stops you from losing yourself in it. Eventually, you'll meet someone new, and yes, at first glance there may be fascination, but this time the fire doesn't erupt in absence. It builds in presence. This time you don't mistake longing for devotion. You bring your whole context, not just your flaws, but your aspirations. You bring your clarity. You bring your boundaries. Most importantly, you show up not waiting to be completed, but wanting to intersect. That is, add to the story of your already standing self. That changes everything, and perhaps this is the final truth in this journey. The universe doesn't close its doors in heartbreak. It closes them in clarity, and sometimes that clarity hurts more than heartbreak, because heartbreak is drama, a story you can tell. Clarity is inner collapse, it's silence, and it's the only landscape where you emerge meaningfully alive. So, if you've felt that flash of impossible connection, if you've been haunted by absence long after someone left, if you've felt split open and ungrounded and unsure, you're in the beginning of something. Don't rush to patch it. Don't rush to someone else. Don't rush over the threshold. Stay. Be with the ground under your feet. Breathe into the fissure and let it widen the space you have for your own presence. Let it make you more spacious, more honest, more open. Only then will you attract not someone who completes your story, but someone who complements it. And this is the gift of the impossible encounter, not the moment it happened, but the person it forced you to become. The seer, the empath, the sovereign, the survivor, the self-knowing soul. When that becomes your identity, you enter a new order. You're no longer available for projections. You're not available to trauma, bonds, to romanticized rescues, to addictive intensity. You are deeply, beautifully, undeniably available to yourself. That is liberation. That is psychic sovereignty. That is love's hidden purpose, not to fulfill you, but to refine you. So, friend, wherever you are standing in longing, in grief, in restless twilight of unfulfilled connection, listen closely. The most profound relationship you will ever have doesn't begin with someone outside. It begins now, with stillness, with breath, with the slow attention you give yourself. It begins here, with acceptance, of absence, of fracture, of shadows. That acceptance is the threshold of transformation. What lies beyond is no fairy tale. It's far more luminous. It's life sung by you. You've already started. You heard the tremor. You saw the crack. You read the mirror. Now you decide if you'll follow the drift inside. If you will, then know this. You will find not another person. You will find yourself, and crossing that threshold, that is, without fault, without fantasy, without other, that is your greatest belonging.